Hey there, it's Chris from Good Roads, and in the last video I showed you how to press multiple decks at the same time out of one of my 3D printed fingerboard presses, and I kinda just didn't stop. As a matter of fact, I printed more presses so I could print more decks. And with a honking stack of blanks, the world seems to be my fingerboard oyster. I could make a ton of different decks with different shapes and different graphics, but I think what I'm gonna do instead is make a limited edition run of decks. Which means making the same deck over and over again, which makes my ADHD brain absolutely throw a fit. But for me, there is so much value in taking a stab at this. I'm gonna have to work out the details of making these things in a repeated way, in a controlled way that lets me get the same results over and over and over again. I'll be getting some practice in doing these repeated processes and building these skills, and the best part about this is in building these skills on a small scale, when I go over to do runs of full-size decks, everything will transfer over, and hopefully it'll make that much easier. So let's not gild the lily any further, let's get into it. The first thing I need to sort out is cutting my decks out from these blanks. Up until now, I've been doing this by hand, by tracing a shaper block and cutting and sanding the decks to shape. But I'm staring down the barrel of more than 20 decks, and I'd love to have a way that's easier and more accurate to do this repeatedly. Enter my Adazer P20 laser cutter. When I was first testing out this machine, I did an experiment to see if it could cut out fingerboard decks, and it worked. But the biggest issue was going to be alignment and registration, which is just making sure everything goes where it needs to go every time. So this is my solution to that tooling problem. This is a 3D printed jig that has alignment pins that mate with the bolt holes of the deck, and the bottom has this sort of shelf running around the outside. The blanks lock to place on the jig, and the jig is much smaller than the finished dimensions of the deck, so it's going to be out of the way of the laser when the laser makes its cuts. But before I use this jig, I need to get my laser set up, and I need to make sure it doesn't move. I still don't have enough counter space or ventilation in my shop in the basement to run this thing, so I'm going to be outdoors again. I'm back out on my front porch. I slapped down a sheet of steel as a little bit of home laser proofing, and then a sheet of plywood. And I screwed that to the deck so it wouldn't go anywhere. Then I got the cutter in place.
We don't want it to be crooked though. Alrighty, something like that, I guess. Just a little bit of room to play.
And toenailed it in with some screws as well.
There's no wood. Well, that should work. Okay, I don't think that's going anywhere.
And hopefully that'll keep it in place long enough for me to run all the cuts for this project. With my machine and workpiece locked down, I can make the first cut, and it is a rectangle. But here's where it gets cool, because I can pop that rectangle out.
Yeah. Hopefully. Yeah, dude, perfect fit too. That's exciting.
And the shelf side of my jig fits perfectly into that slot. This gives me a guaranteed position in Lightburn that I can use to locate all of the different cuts and engraves that I'll need to do over the course of this project. So, let's get a blank in place.
And there we go. Pretty registered. Cool.
Get the height of the laser set. And send this first cut. Oh, heck yeah, that is so cool. The shape is perfect and the cut is super clean. But seeing this burn down here, I was worried that I might eventually cut through my locating board. So I took a shot at adding some aluminum tape under the jig. I ran another deck, and yeah, that seems to work. It's holding up better than the wood, at least. After some minor positioning adjustments, all I had to do was drop in a blank, run the cut, remove the blank, and repeat until all of the decks were cut out. A little while later, I had some kindling and a fat stack of rough cut decks. And this is so cool. The shapes look great and the cuts aren't charred that badly at all. I love the level of precision I was able to get with this method. I grabbed some sandpaper because I was curious at how deep in the wood the charring from the burn went, and honestly, not bad at all. That's exciting if I ever want to do some cool color plies at some point. The rails of the deck will be easy to clean up and make the details like that visible. Okay, the next step is countersinking the bolt holes. So I grabbed my burr from McMaster Carr and my DIY depth stop collet, which is available at goodroadscollective.com, and got to work. I chose to do the countersinking here because if I get any kind of marring on the surface of the decks from the depth stop, any sanding I do later in the process will clean it right up. The next step is rounding the rails, and the further away from the laser cutter we get, the less confident I am in my ideas about how to process a lot of decks at once. I took a stab at making a tiny mini version of my Bishop router jig that I use for full-size decks. It uses the smallest roundover bit I've ever seen. Instead of getting super in-depth on this design, I'll just say right now, I'm not thrilled with how it worked, and I think I'm probably barking up the wrong tree with this idea. The jig did an okay job of rounding over the straight cuts, but absolutely chewed up the curves of the nose and the tail when I tested it. And even with the parts of the board where it did kind of work, it didn't work that well. It did a middling job of stock removal, but I really don't think the juice was worth the squeeze. And with a stack of only partially rounded decks, I had to figure out something else. So I dug up this old boy. Anybody remember this thing? This is a spindle motor with a soft, spongy sanding drum on it. It works pretty dang well for full-size decks, so let's see how it works with their little brothers. As is always the case with these processes, it took a little getting used to. But I think in the end it worked out pretty well, and I got through rough sanding all of the decks in fairly short order. Which means it's on to my least favorite part of any woodworking project, hand sanding. Sanding is boring to do and boring to edit, and I'll go ahead and guess it's boring to watch, so here's a quick version of what I did. I used 180 grit to get all the curves even, and then I used a 220 grit sanding sponge to get an awesome surface finish, especially on the rails so they're nice and smooth. So this is kind of the big question, the big elephant in the room. Let me ask you this. How do y'all round and sand your edges on these micro decks? Let me know down in the comments. Is there a more efficient way to do it? Because I feel like this is ripe for improvement. I've got some ideas involving walnuts and the spinning drum, but yeah, I don't know, man. I'm feeling a little lost on how to make this part easier. Anyway, many sheets of spent sandpaper later, and I've got a stack of finished fingerboard blanks that look so good and are primed for graphics. Which is gonna be the next video, but the graphics are actually done. We're just getting a lot of rain right now. I'm waiting on some clear weather to do a clear coat, and then I have to number all of the different decks in the edition. But look at these guys. They came out so good. I'm actually thrilled with how the end product of this project comes out. I do still need to do that finish work, but if you want to make sure that you get one, because it is a limited edition, there are 27 decks total, 22 of the main color, and then a couple variations on the colorways. If you want to make sure that you get one, you can pre-order them from the shop right now, and they should be shipping within the week. I'm just waiting for some clear weather. doing these projects, developing these techniques, sharing them with you guys so that you can take them and make your own boards is something that I really love. And beyond like getting what I think is a cool object, like I'm really thrilled with how these came out. I think they're really high fidelity and beautiful and like pleasant to touch and everything. In addition to that, if you pre-order or buy one when they're finished, it's an awesome way to support the channel and support me being able to share these projects with you here on YouTube. And honestly, if you were to pre-order it, it would just warm the sawdust-filled cockles of my heart. I really should have worn a dust mask. I was outside, I thought it would be okay, but it was a lot of sawdust. I'm stoked on the project so far. As tiny as these guys are, this is my first run of decks. And it has been just a great learning experience. Making the transition from making a single deck at a time to making larger quantities of decks, making edition runs, or just even having a model someday down the line is something that I want to do so badly, but it's always been really intimidating because the repeated processes come with a lot more tooling, a lot more repeated work, and kind of the need for a lot more efficiency in order to make it worthwhile. And I think these tiny fingerboard decks have been a great way to start cutting my teeth on that and start learning those processes and experimenting with how to get that done. So that's gonna be it for this one. If you like seeing me design, print, and test entire router jigs that then need to be thrown in the trash where they belong, then you need to thank this crew right here, because the support on Patreon is a big part of what allows me to experiment, develop techniques, and especially fail, and share all that stuff and all that information with you here on YouTube. They're there to catch me when stuff hits the fan. And, you know, along with making all the stuff that actually does work. Your support's invaluable for that too. If you want to support the channel and be awesome like these folks, why don't you consider joining the Patreon or grab something from the shop? Get yourself a pre-order for the fingerboard decks or get yourself some tools to make your own boards and get out there and make boards. That's what I want you to do. That's why I do this. Make boards. If you want to see how I got these graphics on these things, well, that's going to be the next video, so just go ahead and subscribe. And if you've got a technique for rounding edges that's repeatable, that's systemic, that's not hand sanding, just leave me a comment down below. Or come chill with us in the Shapers Guild Discord, which there's a link here and there's a link on the site. I gotta add a fingerboard section, but I'm gonna do that soon. With that said, I love having you along for the ride, whether we're making big boards or small ones. So until next time, I'll see you soon.
Like a kind of portrait. Do you have to watch the show?